Hang on, I have to sneeze. Okay, got that out of the way. Good morning. Welcome to the reading. We're going to read that one snuck up on me, sorry. We're going to read Enoch's book, The Problem of Evil and the Judgments of God. Hang on, let me bring it into view. And let me go over to the THEO channel and announce that we're over here. So stragglers can come in and listen. Hang on, I'm still getting set up. Let me put you on mute until I can figure this. I'm here, hang on. I'm just doing some things. Things require to be done. Hang on, baby, while I do some things, baby. Okay. I'm about ready. Let me know that you're viewing by saying hello in the side chat. Let me adjust my screen so we can see this puppy together. Yeah, that might work. Okay, the repudiation of sin. This is from the book The Problem of Evil, which came out about 100 years ago, written by Mr. A. Enoch. And all of these articles, these These chapters appeared in the Unsearchable Riches magazine. They started publishing that magazine in 1910. And it was kind of a result of their new thoughts as they began the translation of the concordant literal New Testament. Because when you translate concordantly, it forces you to think a new thought. Okay, the repudiation of sin. That Christ appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself will seldom be denied. It is in the Bible, Hebrews 9:26. In a diluted form, it is not infrequently met with in religious literature. The obvious teaching of the words, which is fully supported by the context, is that the sacrifice of Christ is of such surprising efficacy that the fact, not merely in the many acts, is to be put away. That sin, the fact, not merely the many acts, is to be put away or repudiated. It is our purpose to inquire more accurately as to the significance of this expression by studying its principal terms and by harmonizing its scope with the context in which it is found. Such a satisfactory thought, so stupendous an assertion, is too much for the human heart. So, the main occupation of expositors has not been to expound it, but to impound it within the narrow confines of their creed. God, don't they do that, though? They limit and marginalize the efficacy of Christ's work on the cross. They do not expound upon it. Such a satisfactory thought, so stupendous an assertion, is too much for the human heart. So the main occupation of the theologians and the expositors has not been to expound on it, but to impound it within the narrow confines of their creed. We shall merely mention the main methods used to limit the scope of this passage, lest its glorious light should illumine our hearts. And what's the passage again? Let's back up. It's from Hebrews 9:26. To put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Wow. All right, let's go with the underline tool, because that sounds like it's going to be something beautiful. To put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Okay. A careful study of the word sin in the epistle to the Hebrews will show that it's not used of the sin offering, as is the case in Hebrew. Oh, I see, in the Hebrew language. A careful study of the word sin in the epistle to the Hebrews will show that it is not used of the sin offering, as in the case in Hebrew. Not only is this evident from many of the passages, but it is put beyond question if we consider those places where the sin offering is referred to. Then it is either a sacrifice, Hebrews 5:1, or offering, Hebrews 10:18, for sin, or a special phrase concerning sin is used in Hebrews 10:6 and 8. In these cases, the Authorized Version has felt justified in supplying the word sacrifices or offering. It was necessary to make this distinction clear to the Hebrews, though they were well aware of the fact that sin was used of the offering in the Scriptures. Since this is done in every other passage, we have no ground for giving sin a special meaning here. The doctrine of the repudiation of sin at the conclusion of the eons is the scriptural solution to one of the more grave problems which perplex many when pondering God's connection with sin. Not knowing that sin is essentially error due to the operation of death, and that God could introduce it without himself making a mistake, can justify it and will repudiate it when its mission has been accomplished, men seek to rescue him, God, from any connection with its advent, even robbing him of his deity and supremacy and foreknowledge in order to do so. Wow. Indeed, they supplant him by a more powerful antagod, not of his creation, nor subject to his throne. All right. I got to highlight this booger because this was a really lovely paragraph. So you'll just have to hold on a second. Now let's read it again. The doctrine of the repudiation of sin at the conclusion of the eons is the scriptural solution to one of the grave problems which perplex many when pondering God's connection with sin. Not knowing that sin is essentially error due to the operation of death, that's worth underlining as well, don't you think? That sin is an error due to the operation of death. Do you get that meaning? Because in Romans 5:12, it says that when Adam sinned, death entered into the scene, and thus death was passed through into all mankind. So the operation of death makes us sin. We are mortal, and that's what makes us sin. So this sentence makes sense if you understand the actual teaching of Romans 5:12. Not knowing that sin is essentially error due to the operation of death, and that God could introduce sin without himself making a mistake and can justify sin and will repudiate sin when sin's mission has been accomplished and men seek to rescue God from any connection. That is, men typically seek to rescue God from any connection with sin's advent, even robbing God of his deity and supremacy and foreknowledge in order to do so. Indeed, they supplant him by a more powerful antagod, not of his creation, nor subject to his throne. Pretty fancy words to say that the best that the Christian world has is that Satan created himself, and don't blame God. Reconciliation calls for more than mere cessation of sin. Reconciliation calls for more than mere cessation of sin. Sin has wrought such terrible havoc in the hearts of some of God's creatures that its mere absence will not suffice to win their affection. Sin has caused such terrible havoc in the hearts of some of God's creatures that its mere absence will not suffice to win their affection. And winning their affection is what reconciliation is all about. It's not just saving someone from death. It's winning the affection. That's another level altogether of God's grand plan. The relief will be great, but the remembrance of its distress will rankle unless it is both repudiated and justified, unless sin is both repudiated and justified. At that time, God will show how essential sin was in the past and how non essential it is for the future. Oh, yeah. I'm down for underlining that. At that time, God will show how essential sin was in the past and non essential it is for the future. Wow. It will be justified by its results. It will be repudiated because it will not only be unnecessary for any future revelation of God's heart, but possibly subversive glory and his creatures' good. Even those who have the most superstitious reverence for the King James Version will hardly excuse the rendering of Hebrews 9:26, quote, "But now in the end of the world hath he appeared." Well, it cannot be explained on any rational grounds. It cannot be explained on any rational grounds. Christ has appeared, but it certainly was not at the end of the world. The American revisers changed this to the end of the ages, which is very much better so far as the word eon is concerned, but it is open to the same objection. The eons have not by any means ended even yet. Christ did not appear either at the end of the world or the end of the ages. And we may add, sin has not been put away in any plain, intelligible sense. Even in the believer, the evidence of sin is present. We cannot say that it has been put away unless we limit it to face apprehension of our position before God. And this is a Pauline doctrine quite foreign to the teaching of Hebrews. The American Revision suggests the word consummation for the end in its margin. The concordant version has conclusion. As this is an important point, we will give the evidence in full. Quote unquote, end is the usual translation of telos, finish, which the concordant version renders consummation. But the word here is enriched by the prefix together. Literally, it is the together finish or the conclusion of the eons. Only by studying all its occurrences will we be able to fix the full meaning of this term conclusively. It is used elsewhere only in Matthew's account and always in the phrase, the conclusion of the eon. The passage before us differs only in the fact that instead of the singular eon, we have the plural eons. If we can discover the relation which the conclusion of the eon bears to a single eon, we will be able to determine how the conclusion of the eons is related to all the eons. The following are all of the occurrences in Matthew. Let's see, does it go elsewhere? Yeah, and then we'll compare it to Hebrews. Hang on while I take a sip of coffee. Good morning, by the way, and welcome. If you just showed up, say hello. And if you just showed up, we're reading The Problem of Evil and the Judgments of God. And this chapter is called The Repudiation of Sin. Hang on, I got to clear my throat. All right, so here are all the occurrences in Matthew of the phrase conclusion or conclusion of the eons. Matthew 13, verse 39, verse 40, verse 49, and then chapter 24, verse 3, and then chapter 28, verse 20, and here we go. What time is it? Let me check the time. 6:24 a.m. Okay. Now the harvest is the conclusion of the eon. Good morning, Donna. Good morning. Now the harvest is the conclusion of the eon. Thus shall it be in the conclusion of the eon. Thus shall it be in the conclusion of the eon. And what sign and what is the sign of thy presence and of the conclusion of the eon? And finally, and lo, I am with you all the days till the conclusion of the eon. So all these are singular, and the concordant version used the word conclusion. And then we get to Hebrews 9:26. At the conclusion of the eons, he has appeared at the conclusion of the eons for the repudiation of sin through his sacrifices he manifests. We must clearly distinguish between the consummation and the conclusion, the finish and the together finish. The former is the final crisis, a mere point in time. The latter is a concluding period which closes at the consummation. The present eon will have a somewhat protracted season at its close, which is compared to a harvest. It will include the judgment at the end time, as detailed by our Lord in his parables of the darnel in the field and the dragnet, from Matthew 13, 37 through 43 and 47 through 51. Okay, as detailed by our Lord in his parables of the darnel in the field and the dragnet, the next eon will also have a judgment season at its end. The character of these periods is not pertinent to our present study. All we wish to press is the fact that they are extended periods of time, not a sudden crisis like the consummation. In this light, the conclusion of the eons becomes clear. It is not equivalent to the final, finishing, culminating, completing crisis called the consummation, which cannot come until the eon's end. It is in the eons. It is in the eons. It is their concluding portion. It is not this, is not this just what we would expect in such an epistle as Hebrews? Like all the circumcision writings, it is strictly limited in its scope to the eons. The epistle to the Hebrews deals only with the circumcision aspect of the work of Christ. It does not concern the nations and the evangel for them today. Mixed with present truth, it creates confusion. Kept separate, it enlightens us as to the holy nation and God's dealings with them in other eras. In the 9th chapter, Christ is presented as the antitype of Israel's chief priest and the sacrifices he offered every year in order to keep the nation near. The tabernacle, a type of the worlds or the eons. The tabernacle and temples are types of future spiritual realities and indicate the way of access into the presence of a holy God. The tabernacle typified the Pentecostal era. Solomon's sanctuary prefigured the millennial day, and Ezekiel's house points to the new earth. Yet their general arrangement does not change. Each has a court, a holy place, and a holy of all, and the holiest of all. In their common systems, we seem to have a type or illustration of the various worlds or systems and the corresponding eons or ages. Indeed, the tabernacle is distinctly related to the cosmos or world. When we read of a worldly sanctuary or a holy place, Hebrews 9:1, King James, the same form of phrase is used of the two holy places as we find in connection with the eons. Both together are called the holies of the holies. Hebrews 9:25. The inner shrine is called the holy of the holies. Hebrews 9:3. These correspond exactly with the eons of the eons and the eon of the eons. They will serve not only to explain these phrases, but suggest a more intimate relation. The tabernacle and temple system divides the realm of space into divisions which correspond in number and character to the worlds and eons. There are 5 in each, and in the same order, which are marked with striking features of correspondence. Both give us the way to God, one for the individual sinner, the other for the race. All, of course, is confined to the terrestrial viewpoint, for no tabernacle or temple can possibly illustrate the immediate and unhindered access which characterizes the ministry of the conciliation for the present age. The 5 divisions, if you want to check out what the ministry of the conciliation is, hop over to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, start at 14 and wind up on verse 21. The 5 divisions essential to the tabernacle system are, number 1, the outside camp. Number 2, within the camp. Number 3, the court. Number 4, the holy place. And number 5, the Holy of Holies. These readily divide into 3 and 2, for only the last 2 in the tabernacle itself are in the tabernacle itself and called the holies of the holies, just as the last 2 worlds or eons are distinguished by an actual entrance into the sphere of God's presence and are called the eons of the eons. Very little indeed is said about the world outside the camp. The same is true of the first eon. Like the vast stretches of space which surround the encampment of the favored people lies the long vista of time which formed the first eon. Still, there are suggestive hints which link them together. We were chosen in Christ before the disruption, that is, in the first world or eon, for the disruption was at its close. And our place is outside the camp of Israel. In space as well as time, we are dealt with on quite distinct lines. The tabernacle and the tabernacle and the temple system never reaches back to the first eon. It is always from the disruption. So it had no jurisdiction beyond the confines of the camp. It is essentially, in both time and space, an eclectic, exclusive, limited arrangement, just as Israel's place in the Aeonian times. The second world or eon From the disruption to the flood is the scene of sin, with which no means of covering or cleansing. I didn't mean to say which, I meant to say just which. All right, let me try it again. The second world or eon, from the disruption to the flood, is the scene of sin with no means of covering or cleansing. So the camp was peopled with sinners whose only recourse was to go through it into the sacred enclosure if they wish to approach God or settle for their sins. The third or central division is the court of the tabernacle, which is certainly most suggestive of the present world or eon. The brazen altar, that supreme type of the death of Christ, reminds us that this present world or eon has been hallowed by the great sacrifice, which also makes it possible to enter into the holy places beyond. In this eon, wicked as it is the true laver for the cleansing of all defilement. True, the full effect of the altar and the laver have not yet been felt. But that is because we have not entered into the holy places. These figures are the future eons. These figure the future eons. Good morning, owls. The glory of God is not revealed in the court, but is hid behind a curtain and rough coverings. Neither has God revealed his glory to this world or eon. But in the millennial era, there will be at least a partial revelation of his magnificence. The furniture of the holy place, the lampstand, the table of showbread, and the golden altar are all beautifully typical of Christ himself in that eon, and of the portion which will be enjoyed by the saints of that blessed day. There will be light, divine light, quite the opposite of the present, when dense darkness covers the earth, and men know no light except that of the sun. The knowledge of God will fill the hearts of his people and cover the whole earth. Such is the suggestion of the seven-branched lampstand in the holy place. The temple, with its 12 cakes or loaves of bread, is also most unlike the present, with all its divisions and lack of spiritual sustenance. A united nation will enjoy God's provision in his presence. The golden altar of worship will waft its sweet incense aloft throughout the eon, a blessing such as never before had been known. The psalm of praise will find their full expression when David's greater son, Jesus Christ our Lord, rules and presides as the great priest of his people. But the holy place is not the holiest of all. There is still another curtain which hides such majesty as is reserved for the highest manifestation of God in the system. The same is true of the corresponding eon. The millennium is by no means the last of the eons or the most glorious. This is true. That is true of the next eon, the day of God. I stumbled there. Let me try it again. The holy place is not the holiest of all. There is still another curtain which hides such majesty as is reserved for the very highest manifestation of God in this system. The same is true of the corresponding eon. The millennium is by no means the last of the eons or the most glorious. That is true of the next eon, the day of God. And the most notable feature of that surpassing era is the presence of God himself. just as it is the crowning glory of the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle and the temple. The path into the presence of God is the common object of thought in the arrangement of the eons and the tabernacle type. The distinction between them is like the difference between the title Elohim and the name Yahweh. One deals with the problem from the standpoint of time, the other sees it in space. Yahweh is the Aeonian God. He made the eons, the highway of time, leading the race into the presence of the Shekinah. Elohim arranges a perceptible material system within the tabernacle structure and within the tabernacle structure at its center to teach the same truth. No marvel that there is so notable a correspondence between them. A very important lesson may be learned from the terms used to describe the holy places. When dealing with the eons, we're often told that the eons of the eons is an effort to express infinity. Ha! That's not true, boys and girls. In dealing with the eons of the eons, we're often told that it's an expression to express infinity, ages tumbling on ages, ages on ages, etc. If we transfer these expressions from time to space, we may more readily see how little ground there is for such explanations. The Holy of Holies is not to be understood as holies tumbling on holies, but holy places made preeminently holy in relation to other places. All inside the court was holy. All inside the court was holy, but the two places inside the building were the holies of holies, the most holy of all. The Holy of Holies is commonly and correctly understood as a single holy place, the Holy of Holies. Why would not the eon of the eons be a single eon? The preeminence of the Holy of Holies lies in its relation to the other holy places. So the preeminence of the eons lies in its being the fruitage and harvest of the preceding eons. The confusing translations and expositions which hide the truth of the eons from us would never be tolerated if they were applied to such tangible objects as the tabernacle and the temples. We read that the chief priests entered into the Holy of Holies, the holies of the holies. That's Hebrews 9:25. Most of the manuscripts read simply the holies or the holy places. Only the editor of the Sinaiticus preserves this reading. So unusual and difficult a reading might easily be dropped, so that very little evidence is needed to establish it. When we compare this phrase with the parallel one of the eons of the eons, we cannot be but struck with its aptness. Just as the last two eons are of the eons, so the two holy places are of the holies. They are the most hallowed out of all the holy places, among which we certainly must include the court, if not the camp, which had a measure of sanctity. Certain sacrifices concerned with sin being burnt outside its precincts, just as the altar of sacrifice. Man, this is a rough one. Just as the altar of sacrifice was the place at which sin was dealt, so the sacrifice of Christ was the time when sin was repudiated. Hope you're with me. This is a little deeper, more complicated concept he's running through here. You might have to back up the tape and listen to it again. Rewind, as we used to say in the old VHS days. Sin was repudiated. Okay, the brazen altar was in the court, and Golgotha was in the present eon. Had the sinner been able to enter the divine presence in those days, in his approach to God, he would leave his sin at the altar, and it would no longer be in view for the conclusion of his path to the tabernacle and through the holy places. So it is that sin is repudiated at the conclusion of the eons. This conclusion commenced when Christ was made the sin offering. Had not the nation rejected the heralding of the kingdom, there would have been only a short time until the presence of Christ. Just as there were only a few strides to the door of the tabernacle. When he is on the scene, sin will be suppressed as it has never been before. His reign will banish it from the earth. The rendering, quote, put away, is sometimes stoutly defended. It is only necessary to give a list of all the varieties of renderings of this word in all of its forms to convince anyone that it is neither exact nor full. The form of the word is a noun, and it is rendered disannulling in Hebrews 7:18. Put away is rendered disannulling. It is only in its only other occurrence for the verb the King James uses reject, despise, frustrate, bring to nothing, disannul, and cast off. So put away is translated by all these words in the King James. So let's check it out. Another noun is rendered wicked. The adjective is both unlawful thing and abominable. That all may study these for themselves. We give a complete concordance of the authorized versions, renderings of the verb and the noun used herein. And hang on, I gotta turn off the oven. Be right back. Okay. So let's see. We're looking at this topic of the repudiation of sin. And right now we're discussing the word that is translated put away. The King James also translates it reject, despise, frustrate, bring to nothing, disannul, and cast off. And here are the places where in the King James, this word shows up. The word is THEO. Mark, Luke, and John. And here it is. He would not reject her. Ye reject the commandment of. Lawyers rejected the counsel of. He that despiseth you despiseth me. And he that despiseth me despiseth him that sent me. And he that rejecteth me and receiveth blah, blah, blah. What else we got? Oh, here's some more. 1 Corinthians, Galatians, Thessalonians, Timothy, Hebrews, and Jude will bring to nothing the understanding. I do not frustrate the grace of God. Confirm that no man disannulleth, therefore that despiseth not man. They have cast off their first faith. They have despised Moses. We're talking about the word put away, right? Defile the flesh, despise his dominion. And then for this verb business, antithesis, athesis. Only shows up twice in the verb form, verily, a disannulling of, and to put away by the sacrifice of himself. All right. Anyone who reads these passages, oh, good morning, St. Tommy, forgot to mention you. I saw you. Anyone who reads these passages with any attention will see that it is not a mere emotional setting aside or putting away, but includes a conflict of feeling. This we have tried to express by the rendering repudiate and repudiation. The substitute for the proper form in each case, that is, substitute the proper form in each case, and it will be evident that it is always more appropriate besides fitting all the other passages. The point here is not merely the elimination of sin, but a manifestation of God's aversion for it. Oh, that's why it's called repudiation, because God kind of hates it. He deals with it in such a way that his detestation is displayed. In the terms used by the Authorized Version, he rejects, despises, frustrates, and casts off sin. In this view of the repudiation of sin, is in close accord with our discovery that sin is due to the operation of death. But the sacrifice of Christ has brought life, abundant life, and this will counteract the operation of death. This is true today, but the book of Hebrews, deals only with Israel. In the divine reckoning of the sacrifice is soon followed by the coming of Christ, even as the tabernacle was only a few steps from the altar. The present era of grace was a secret and must be overlooked. The present era of grace was a secret and must be overlooked. Then a sacrifice is soon followed by the advent of the Messiah. The eons of the eons are the scenes of life. At the beginning, all who are Christ will be vivified. A large portion of the earth's population in the millennial era will be immortal. Hence, they cannot sin. And the abundant vitality of the last 2 eons enforces the repudiation of sin. The repudiation of sin. Good morning, Red Pill. See you over there. Nice to see you. In confirmation of the exposition here presented, the argument of Hebrews proceeds to set forth 2 appearances of Christ, once bearing sin and then apart from sin, once as suffering and then as Savior. The time of these is clear. One refers to the cross and the other to the kingdom. The salvation spoken of by the prophets, the national redemption of Israel, always includes the repudiation of sin. This is what leads to the political righteousness and the worldwide peace in the millennial era. Sin in all of its forms will be frowned upon, whether in principle or practice. The repudiation of sin is but one of the lower notes in the chord in which will ultimately fill all creation with an eternal harmony. The reconciliation could not be apart from righteousness. Reconciliation could not be apart from righteousness. Vivification without the cessation of sin. What is righteousness? Vivification without the cessation of sin. Am I getting that right? Reconciliation could not be apart from righteousness. Oh, apart from righteousness and vivification without the cessation of sin. Oh man, this sentence is puzzling me. Reconciliation could not be apart from righteousness, vivification without the cessation of sin. Oh, I get it. Vivification without the cessation of sin doesn't make any sense. Hang on. Reconciliation. Never mind. Let's go on. Sin, as we have seen, cleaves to those who are dying. Where no one is dying, there would be no sin. So when all will be vivified, when death is abolished, sin will be utterly absent. All right, now let's see if that sentence makes sense. The repudiation of sin is but one of the lower notes in the chord, which will ultimately fill all creation with its eternal harmony. Reconciliation could not be apart from righteousness, vivification, without the cessation of sin. Okay, I get it. I think he needs another comma after the word vivification. Reconciliation could not be apart from righteousness, vivification, without the cessation of sin. Okay, I get it, finally. The glorious consummation will be based on a full vindication of God's connection with sin. The fact that he used it to carry out his gracious purpose demands also that his attitude toward it be fully manifest, lest his creatures imagine that he approves of it and proposes to give it a permanent place in his universe. This is the charge which is brought against us now when we acknowledge that all is of God. But such an impression will not be possible during the last 2 eons. Indeed, it is quite possible that we are on the very threshold of the great judgments that will show God's attitude towards sin. This has been aptly illustrated by means of a blackboard. It is desirable that the background for the use of the white chalk be perfectly black. So long as it is only gray, there is not sufficient contrast to display the white lettering. It will pay to apply coat after coat of paint to achieve its ends. More than this, however, is a useless waste. Paint an inch in thickness is no blacker than a thin film. So God is painting a dark background for the display of his grace. This much is necessary. More than this is useless and repugnant. The two eons that are nearly past suffice for background. The greatest display of grace has been accomplished. Judgment now impends, which will show that God does not delight in sin. Whatever he may make of it, the very necessity for the repudiation of sin shows that it was included in his procedure and plays a part in his purpose. Uh-oh. The next chapter is all about Judas. Oh, thank you guys for hanging out with me for an hour reading this one, The Repudiation of Sin. I admit it was a tough one for me. A little difficult to follow the grammar from 100 years ago. And it was a complex topic, too. How Mr. Nock was comparing the 5 eons that we know about to the 5 separations regarding the temple and the tabernacle. And the 2 innermost places in the temple and the tabernacle are both called the Holy of Holies. When they're mentioned together, the Holies of Holies, just like we refer to the eons of the eons, and the final eon is the eon of the eons. Anyway, it was a bit rough. Go back and listen to it again. At least you're just listening. I got to read the damn thing. This next chapter should be a lot more fun. And be sure and tell everyone that the next chapter is going to be about the God of Judas. That's going to be great. And I'm going to close down this show and we'll start up another one, but I have to take care of some things first. So give me about, 15, 20 minutes. I'll go ahead and set it up so you can find your way there. And, I guess I could do it now while you're paying attention. I'll set it up. I'll give you the link and then we'll head over there. What shall we call it? How about the son of his love? That's what we'll call it. So hang on, I'll give you the link. Okay, schedule for later. What time is it now? 7:05, so we'll try and do it at least by 7:45. Oh, hang on. I'm still got to click here and click there to get the doodad information. Okay, I finally got it to give to you. Hang on. Okay. Got it. There we go. That'll be the link. Oh! And we'll do it in about 35 minutes, okay? Grace to you. Bye for now.